Hi, my name is Sherrie Smith-Ferri. I am a tribal elder at Dry Creek Rancheria Band of Pomo Indians in Sonoma County, which is to say I'm an old dog and I am trying a new trick with this digital recording. So I apologize in advance for any snafus along the way. And I also wanted to say that I really would much rather this be a conversation with you all, but needs must. So I'm going to give this a try. And I should say that the origin of my thinking about this talk was a conversation I had with a friend who's a bookstore manager. And at the time, I was working on a project that became this book, Water Dog and the Love Charm. And it's a story that was told by my grandmother's oldest sister, Elizabeth Cordova Dollar. And here's a picture of Aunt Belle, we used to call her. And it was to edit and put this story into book form. And I asked the manager, would you place this book in your store? Do you think it would sell? And so she read it. And her response to me was really interesting. She said, I like the story, but I don't know what I would do with it in my bookstore. She said, it is not a children's story. It has some adult content and it doesn't end happy. And I thought, isn't that an interesting response? So it's kind of has a couple of assumptions embedded into it. One of which is that Native stories are just for children, and that they don't have adult content. Water Dog and the Love Charm is about interspecies romance, in fact, extramarital interspecies romance, and indeed, it doesn't end happy. And so it's an interesting assumption that that's what children's stories should do. In this case, Water Snake, who is one of the heroes of the story, or the main participants in the story. Water Snake has been seducing Little Frog, who is married to Bullfrog, and has talked her into running off with him. Water Snake took Little Frog to their new home, where Water Dog and Bear were. The bear was sitting by the water, and Water Dog was inside the pond. The bullfrog couldn't get across the creek because the water was pretty high and he didn't want to cross. And so they just stayed there, Water Snake and Little Frog. They stayed there. And then the bullfrog went over and killed Water Snake. And that's the end of the story. Probably a much more realistic story ending than most children's stories. And so there's, sort of one of the ideas I want to just discard at the beginning. It's this idea that these stories are for children. They're not. They're for everybody. And they are not simple childlike stories. They're actually pretty sophisticated and complex, though the language that they use and the way that they're told are very accessible and non-scientific sounding. And so I think this complexity and sophistication isn't recognized adequately. They're not simple how-come stories. They teach people how to understand and manage life in the natural world that is their home. They are a very important source of information. These stories usually have a really relational view of the world. And what I mean by that are humans are just, in these stories, a member of the neighborhood. And what you really learn about in these stories are all the other members of the neighborhood. So believe me, Mr. Rogers has nothing on us. So you learn about the crazy neighbors and the neighbors that you should be wary about. And you learn about your good neighbors. You learn about people like Flint Boy, or some people call him Obsidian Boy, who is very sharp and cuts things up. You learn about Water Dog, as we just did, which is our name for Newt. You learn about Skunk Woman, who doesn't always smell the best. You learn about things like Peppernut Girl, people like Peppernut Girl, and how she got up in the tree. You learn about Flea and Louse, and how they love the people. You learn about Old Man Coyote. So there's stories about all these beings in the world, and humans are just one of those beings. And they teach you about, I would say, characteristic patterns of behavior, usually based on, just eons of observation. And the stories really encourage you to make your own observations, to look at the world around you, and to keep learning from the world around you. They're actually convey often, those stories, much more useful pieces of information than these kind of disconnected bits of data that are often what you take away from Western science, kind of names and numbers. These stories give you a vision of a world that is full of power. And that power is to be respected. You have stories of floods and lakes drying up and earthquakes. You have stories about a world around you in which things can go wrong, at least for humans, and often do go wrong. I would say that's a more realistic and pragmatic view of the world and the limits of humans and what we can do vis-a-vis that world and in that world, than I would say Western society is used to, and that's a good thing. Those stories are really an acknowledgement of human dependence on the natural world around them. And the stories sort of teach about human beings' responsibility to take care of the world around them and ways to do that. So to sort of bring this home to botany, I would say that's kind of what underlies a lot of the teaching that we have around gathering plants, using plants, tending plants. So, we're taught that plants are alive and have personhood, and have intelligence, that they're aware, that they need to be talked to, that they like actually hearing their names, and they like hearing their name. We would say their real name, their native name, their name that they've been called for many, many thousands of years from us. They like to be thanked. So when you're going to go and gather material, you want to tell the plants for baskets. Say you're gathering material for baskets, you want to tell the plants what you're doing, what you're using the plants for, that they're going to go on to a life of beauty, that you are going to help them become healthier through sort of cutting them back, digging them, kind of doing these things you need to do to get the sort of growth you need for basket material. And that you always ask the plant for the gift of themselves, and then you always give them thanks for that gift, whether that's a song, whether that's I'll go bring chocolate to plants. I'll give them my hair. I'll give them different things. And that you build up this relationship with your plants. I would say that some of science is sort of catching up with some of this view of plants as being in relation, and sort of all this stuff in a community, all this stuff on sort of mycorrhizal fungi and what do they call it? The forest wide web. That's not news to Native people. I think that it's great to sort of see a more widespread acknowledgement of that. And I would say those practices really help you build ties of shared experience and kind of long familiarity with the plants around you, the natural world, the community around you. Ties of reciprocal obligations, ties of affection. I think there's several things maybe I would recommend that kind of people read that do sort of marry science and that view of the world together. One of those is this book by friend Kate Marienchild called Secrets of the Oak Woodlands, where again, a very, very relational view of the world and complex view of the natural world around. And something that I found in a journal called EMBO Reports, EMBO Reports, Volume 21, Issue 3 from March 4th of 2020. An article called Plants, Climate, and Humans by Beluska and Mancuso. And I just wanted to, again, in that vein, read a quote from the article. Ian T. Baldwin suggested that higher plants overcome their immobility constraints by their plant-specific environmental intelligence. Humans are not excluded from plants' manipulative behavior either. From the plant's perspective, their domestication is not just subservience, but rather coevolution, whereby both partners benefit from each other. Crops and many medicinal plants produce chemicals that alter human brain chemistry, physiology, and behavior, similar to flowering plants that manipulate insects to become their pollinators and bodyguards. Our tight coevolution and the reliance of humans on plants to provide food, medicines, and recreational drugs might raise the question of who actually domesticated whom. And I wanted to end this talk with a quote from my grandmother. And just so you know who my grandmother is, this is Lucy Smith. And that's a picture of me and grandma, gosh, had to be more than 35 years ago now, probably more like 40. And I was really tickled when I picked this book up. I had friends going through this program, the California Naturalist Handbook, and read an excerpt in here of something that my grandmother said. My mother told me we had many relatives and we all had to live together, so we'd better learn how to get along. My mother said it wasn't too hard to do. It was just like taking care of your younger brother or sister. You got to know them. You found out what they liked and what made them cry, so you know what to do. If you took good care of them, you didn't have to work as hard. It sounds like it's not true, but it is. And that baby gets to be a man or a woman, they're going to help you out. You know, I thought she was talking about us Indians, and how we were all supposed to get along. But I found out from my older sister that Mother wasn't just talking about Indians, but the plants, the animals, the birds, everything on this earth. They are our relatives. And we better know how to act around them or they'll get after us. And I think we are all living with the knowledge of that truth. Thank you.